Hey everybody, Lee from PcjunkieMods here. So today what I'm going to do is show you the process I go through to lay out a water cooling loop. So what I have here in front of me is the Fantex Intho Elite chassis. It is by far probably the best chassis I've seen out of the box. I've already played around with it a little bit, done some trying to lay out some of the water loop and stuff like that. Technically for water cooling you don't need to make any modifications. So a little bit about this build in particular. This build is actually for Intel. It will be at E3, so keep your eyes peeled for that. We'll talk more about that later, maybe in the next video or something. Let's get right into checking out the layout, how we're going to do it, how we're going to plan it, all that kind of stuff. What we have here is an overboard for water cooling setup here, this case. This case is like got every possible thing thought of as far as water cooling goes. Let me see if I can get the door off real quick. So when I was looking at this, I was trying to figure out, this is a critical point, obviously, trying to plan out your loop, especially when it's this intense. Because 3 loops, so the idea for the 3 loops, I know everybody's going to be like, well, why 3 loops? That's overkill. It is overkill, but like I said, this is for Intel. So it's 3 different colors. So it's not necessarily to cool 3 different components. It has to, because you can't mix the loops. In other words, you get different color, you know, you're not going to have the colors that you originally wanted. So we'll get more back into the colors, but one loop's going to go to the CPU, one's going to go to the 2 graphics cards, and one will go to the other graphics card, because there's actually 3 graphics cards, but 2 different graphics cards, if that makes sense. What I'm doing is I will be putting one card here. It's an RX 480, and then the 2 1080 Ti's will be like that. It's water cooled as well, so there'll be 1 loop, 2 loop, and CPU will be a 3rd loop. Now, the reason I stared at this thing for a couple days is because I want to make it look the best it can possibly be, right? So in order to do that, you basically need to put all your hardware and all your water cooling stuff in there. You don't necessarily have to put your power supply in there or your RAM in there. You don't even have to put the CPU block on there. Because the reason I don't have the CPU block on there is because of the fact that I'm not sure if I want it with the ports this way or the ports this way yet. If I want the EK logo upside down with the in port on one side, or if I want the in port on the other side. So that's kind of like a last minute thing, because of the fact I know that I already know how I'm going to run it, but in another system, the last thing you want to probably do for your loop is, once you know how everything looks like it's going to be, you would put the CPU block on, because at that point you should know, once you've figured out where your tubes from your video card are going to the radiator or the res or the pump or whatever, then you'd be able to figure that out. So the idea for this setup, originally I was going to have tubes going everywhere, and that was just going to look nuts, and I don't think it would have looked good. And if you've seen any of my builds, you know that I try to make them look the best they can possibly be, if time allows for it. So this setup here, what we're going to have is a transition through the floor. So I'm going to have a bunch of pass-throughs down here. All the tubes are going to go to the floor, with the exception of, there's this nice little angle here on the video card, so that gives me an option to bring in an angle somewhere else. So I'm trying to keep angles and straights and stuff like that. So what I'm going to be doing here is, as you can see, this, let me bring it into the light a little bit. This reservoir on the end here is going to tie right into that radiator. Then that radiator is going to transition through the floor here, which will tie into a pump and then tie into the component. Actually, that's the return. So this will come straight through. That'll tie into the pump, and then the pump goes to the component comes back and ties into that radiator and goes back into the res. So that's how that'll work. This one, both tubes will come out and go straight through the floor. This one, only one will go through the floor. And as you can see, I have these two slightly angled off the AMD card, and these come straight down. Now these are offset a little bit because what I have is the SLI terminal block from EK on here, but I've turned it around so I have double port instead of a side port. That's all I'd be able to get to. So it hangs off the video card a little bit further, but it does work this way. So I have a parallel terminal block is what it is. So it's going to go in, hit both cards, come back out. Now, when you do that, one of these is countersunk. So you have to put a spacer in there. So that brings this fitting a little bit past this one. So to kind of hide that transition in the floor, because I want it to look really clean, it's still going to look really clean even if I didn't hide it. But to the naked eye, it might look like it's off or something, even though from right here I can tell that these are both not flush. So what I'm doing is taking the AMD tubes, and they're going to land right in front of those two tubes. So basically from the front here, you're going to see 2 tubes instead of 4 tubes. From the side, you'll see 4 tubes. From that side, you'll see 4 tubes, but it'll look clean. And the reason I'm bringing, another reason to bring these over is because I have a radiator up here. I got to bring these 2 tubes down and over and transition through the floor as well. So I'm not sure where I'm going to angle them at yet. I'm probably going to come down to maybe 2 inches on this one, 3 inches on this one, because I want to keep the space consecutive between the tubes. Now, the CPU is going to come out over at an angle to follow the video card. One is going to drop right into the reservoir. The other one is going to hit the floor and go down to the bottom. So that took a lot of thinking how to try to do that. And that's not even including what it's going to be like down here. Because as you can see right now, I just barely have enough room to run my hand over the pump. So it's going to get kind of crazy because there's a tube here that's going to literally land on top of that pump, which I haven't figured out how I'm going to do that yet. I may have to relocate this pump. My main suggestion is to put your GPU, your whatever you're going to water cool needs to be in there. Always put the motherboard in there first. Don't forget your I/O panel. You know, obviously I didn't put it in yet because I'm still keep taking this apart and putting it together. But put your board in there. Put your video card in there, or video cards, whatever it is. Your radiators, you know. If you're at a point where you have your hardware but you don't have your water cooling, you're at that planning out your loop stage, then the best bet is to put all the hardware that you want in that system. If you're going to have a DVD drive in there, you need to put that in there because that might conflict with your radiator. You know, because usually DVD drives are up here in the front. In this chassis, you could actually put DVDs right here. 5 1/4 bays, which is pretty crazy, but yeah. So then what you want to do is you figure out what radiator sizes you need. My recommendation for water cooling is to buy all the bigger components first, come back to fittings later. Because if you buy your radiators, your water blocks, that's the more expensive stuff in the beginning, especially for, I don't want to say a basic water cooling setup, because when you get to this step where you're putting a water cooling system together, it's far from basic. A basic water cooling setup is one of those drop-in units that you could buy, or a box kit, like EK has those box kits. I think Coolants has them, SwiftTech probably has them as well. A lot of those companies have those all-in-one kits that you can buy that come with the liquid, the tubing, the fittings, the radiator, the everything. I don't recommend those. For a beginner, yes, they're great. They work awesome. You get your bang for your buck. They're a good starter, but if you know you want to get into water cooling and you want your system to look a certain way, then you need to go the next step, which is create your own setup. And so when you're laying it out, you want to buy the radiators. You need to make sure that you're buying the right size radiator. It's not going to be too thick because radiators come in different sizes. EK makes, I think, a 30, a 60, and one in between there. It's the slimmer. I needed the slimmer because, as you can see already, I'm already pushing up against that third reservoir. Since I went with the slimmer one here, I decided to go slimmer up here as well, and I need slim down here because of clearance. Unfortunately, I can't find 3 SE radiators, so I'm using a Hardware Labs in the bottom, which you're probably not going to see because it's going to be behind this cool aesthetic door that I'm going to do. Yeah, so we'll get to that in a minute. So I think that pretty much covers laying out your loop and how to plan out a water cooling setup. My main suggestion is to, You know, really just sit back and look at it for a while and study it. Even write it on, draw it out on paper. You know, because crossing a bunch of tubes kind of looks crazy. Anybody can do that. When I say crazy, I mean it looks like crap. When you have nothing but tubes or tube mess of just, you know, it looks like it was just thrown together. That's how my first water cooling setup was. I didn't plan anything. I just was like, okay, well, I'll just plug this one in here, plug this one in there. And before you know it, you have a rat's nest of tubing that's just going across all your components. That never really looks good. If you're doing water cooling, it's usually for system temps, get better temps, a quieter system, longevity of parts, and cool aesthetics to look good. So if you're going for the aesthetic look, you want to definitely plan it out, you know. So I think in the end, let me just put some stuff in here and show you. I've already kind of pre-cut some tubes here. They're not to exact measurements yet, but just to kind of give you an idea. So what we're going to have here is something like this. But as you can see, the look I'm going for now is just almost all straight tubes. So anyways, so stay tuned for the next video. So that pretty much wraps up this video. Thanks for watching. Until next time.